All right, diving in today, getting deep into power and control.
Ooh, power and control.
Yeah, big one,
It's
right?
huge.
It is. And, we're looking at it through kind of the lens of, cognitive processing therapy. That's CPT for those who are following along. That
Yeah,
type of therapy that really looks at how we're thinking about things, especially after, tough times.
yeah.
So really our goal today is to help you kind of find a more balanced view. What can you actually control? What can you influence? What, is really outside of your hands? And how is all that past stuff, shaping how you see things now and what you do?
It's so common after a difficult experience or, lots of experiences to really grapple with this idea of power and control.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times people have this just world belief. It's this idea that, good things happen to good people.
Right.
And when trauma occurs, it really kind of shatters that belief.
Yeah, it's like, wait a minute, the rules don't apply.
Right, exactly. Where's the control in this?
Right. And then that leads to what, we sometimes call these stuck points, right?
Mm-hmm.
That blaming yourself for not stopping something or feeling like, I need to be in control of everything
Right.
just to feel safe again. And that can even show up as, trying to control situations excessively or even,
Other people.
loved ones. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Like, if the world feels out of control,
Right.
you want to grab onto anything you can.
Right. Got to find that control somewhere, I guess.
Exactly.
But that's where, you were talking about that difference between having control over your own actions, right? Versus trying to control everything outside yourself.
Yeah, external factors, other people, situations.
Yeah.
And it's a really important distinction because you do have significant agency over your choices,
Right, right.
even
Yeah.
if, it doesn't feel like that in the moment or the world doesn't.
Right. And it's I love that, you were talking about, have you ever just sat and thought about like how many decisions you make in a day?
So many.
Right. Like from the second you wake up, it's like, do I hit snooze? Do I get out of bed? What am I wearing? Am I going to work out? All these little micro decisions
That we don't think about, yeah.
that really highlight how much control you do have.
Right.
And it's easy to kind of gloss over those when you're in that feeling of powerless.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And so, that can be a really helpful exercise for people because it really gives you that, like, wait a minute, I do have a say here. And, also in those materials, it talks about something called outcome-based reasoning.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think this is something, a lot of people can relate to, where, you make decisions before something bad happens.
Right.
And then because the outcome was negative,
Yeah.
you look back and you unfairly judge those decisions.
Right, right. Like, oh, if I hadn't worn that or hadn't gone there.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like that shirt didn't cause this.
No. Right. Exactly. And I think it speaks to that desire for control and wanting to feel like we can keep ourselves safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because it creates this tension because on the one hand, you have that feeling of powerlessness because of what happened, but then the other side of that is like, well, now I need to feel totally in control.
Right. Exactly. So you have this dialectic of feeling powerless, but simultaneously needing to be in control.
Yeah, yeah. Tough spot to be in.
Really tough spot. And I've seen this a lot clinically, with people. It can really put a strain on relationships.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes that sense of helplessness can also kind of show up in, your work or friendships or like, being able to speak up for yourself.
Absolutely.
Can be harder, when you're in that state of mind.
Yeah. And, I thought it was really interesting in those materials, they talk about using alternative thoughts worksheets.
Right. Yeah.
To kind of help challenge those helpless feelings and really identify options that you might not be seeing.
Right. Right.
They even had an example of a patient who became much more assertive.
Oh, yeah.
Both at work and with friends.
Okay.
After, really looking at, okay, what are my options here?
Right. No, that's so powerful because it's like, you can get stuck.
Stuck in that thought pattern.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't even see the door.
Totally, totally. And I think, what's interesting is, on the flip side of that, right? Sometimes people respond to trauma by trying to control more.
Right.
It's like, well, if only I'd done X, Y, or Z, then this wouldn't have happened.
Then I could have prevented it. Right.
Exactly. And that can lead to this real, like, overcompensating and trying to, like, manage everything.
Right, right, yeah. Which and that's why I think they talk about the importance of addressing those initial beliefs, right, where you might be, unfairly blaming yourself, and those are called assimilation related stuck points.
Right.
Before you can even get to like tackling those broader feelings of like, I can't make good decisions or whatever.
And, it's not just about controlling others or situations. I think, compulsive behaviors can really fall into this category.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Right. So, things like constant checking.
Right.
Or, excessive tidiness, or even, exercising all the time.
Right.
Can actually be your attempts to regain that sense of control.
Or to avoid, tough feelings, maybe.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. But ironically, right, it's like these habits that you start to engage in to control start to control you.
Yeah, it flips. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this also kind of brings us to the topic of, anger, which we see so often kind of, intertwined with these power and control issues. I think it's important for everyone to remember anger is a biological response, right? It's part of that fight, flight, freeze system.
Yes.
And trauma or reminders of trauma can so easily trigger it.
Totally.
And sometimes it even shows up as I think they call it helpless anger, when you can't direct it at, the person who actually hurt you.
Right, like that anger towards the perpetrator.
Right. Yeah.
Like you can't express it.
Yeah. And that's where I think it's so important, to really distinguish between anger, the feeling, right, and aggression, which is the behavior.
Yeah.
And finding healthy ways to express that anger is key, right? And sometimes that anger gets directed outwards, at the world, or even inwards, at yourself.
Self-blame.
For not preventing the trauma, or even for, current issues that might be happening.
Right, exactly.
And I think, it all goes back to that when we're looking at blame, right? It's so crucial to see the difference between things that were just unpredictable, right? That no one could have, seen coming, versus where does the responsibility actually lie?
Right.
And then, was there intentional harm?
Right. Yeah, because not everybody involved in a difficult situation carries that same weight of blame.
Exactly.
And, as we kind of wrap up here, I think it's also important to, think about how you give and take power in your relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And, this isn't always a negative thing.
Right,
like sometimes we give our power away in ways that aren't helpful.
Right.
But, there's also this piece of like maybe demanding something from a partner that would be an example of kind of negative control. But, letting your partner choose what you can have for dinner. That's a way of kind of giving control in a more positive way.
Yeah. And I think, for you listening too, it's that idea of assertiveness.
Yeah.
Right? Like stating your needs respectfully, that's a boundary.
That's a boundary.
It's not aggression. It's not, trying to control.
It's advocating for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
In a healthy way.
Right. So as we, kind of leave you today to think about this stuff, I think a good takeaway for you listening is reflect on, one area of your life where maybe you're trying to control too much, or maybe you're feeling a lack of control, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, just consider what's one small step that you could take to either maybe let go a little or speak up a little more.
Absolutely.
It's a great place to start.
A great place to start.
With this stuff.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Very powerful work.
Yeah.